Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Bill, you are actually this is a noted achievement for you. You are the first eminent American that I've ever had on this show. And of course,
Eminent
this
American as certified by Daniel Oppenheimer.
I mean, what if I was certified by Daniel Oppenheimer? I'm an unpartnered guy right now in life, looking for love. But this is what I would lead in with meeting a woman. I would say I would put that on the top of my dating profiles. I'm an eminent American. This is a group. I look aspirationally too. I mean, this is, and based on what you've written on Ivy League education, I'd much rather be an eminent American than a graduate of Harvard or Yale or anything like that.
Amen. Amen.
Bill, it's so great to have you on the show. You actually, your conversation with Daniel was my introduction to Daniel's podcast, Eminent Americans. Give him a free plug. And I found that conversation so stimulating. I listened to it twice. I talked to several people. I made phone calls. I sent text messages. And you described in that conversation the rise of the non-left. And I felt like someone had given me a moniker, a description, a window. It's one of these things where there's this story about Billy Graham that Billy Graham allegedly was talking to this Buddhist monk, and what's Billy Graham do? He meets a Buddhist monk and he leads him to Jesus, or tries to lead him to Jesus, and then apparently later he comes down from this Tibetan monastery in this dialogue with these monks, and he walks back down the hill, and this monk runs up to him and says, Reverend Graham, thank you. This one you told me about, Jesus, I always knew him, but I never knew his name. I don't know if that's apocryphal or not, but I knew this thing was existing. I had no name for it, this thing called the non-left. And you wrote a little bit about it in a piece called Post-Election in Salmagundi, which I'd never read before you. Again, more introductions. And you really say in this piece, and I'd love for you to just jump out talking a little bit about this. You talk about the left being against the life force. Bill, what's the life force, and why don't you find it in left-wing circles today?
Okay, so let's back up for a second. Salmagundi, by the way, it's a small literary quarterly that's existed for over 60 years. And the most remarkable thing about it is that the person who founded it is still running it.
Wow.
Yeah, he's in his early to mid 80s, and he started it, I guess, shortly after college. Robert Boyers, who's a great guy.
It's pretty interesting to have that much control over something. I don't mean control in the negative sense, right? To have that much institutional continuity and any cultural artifact that has any reach at all is remarkable.
It's true. He's a professor of English at Skidmore, and the journal is subsidized by Skidmore. But in the literary community, I mean, even more like fiction and poetry, which is not my world. It's been a pillar of that community for a long time. And I mean, many very famous, accomplished writers have written for him, and he runs a summer writers institute and has conferences and so forth. And I mean, I know people say this, but it's truly an honor to be able to write for him. And he will often suggest topics to me. And he just asked me to write something about the election and what I thought it meant. And I just sent it in with the working title of post-election piece in brackets. And he just called it post-election, which is fine. I mean, I think that's kind of an evocative.
And this is, I will say, I'm a political junkie to some degree, I suppose. And I've read a ton. I've talked about the election ad nauseum. This is the best piece I've read.
Thank you.
Post-election, and it actually it takes us beyond horse races and polling and things like this. The actual piece of cultural diagnosis that the left ignores at its own peril.
Yeah. It didn't come out until April, which is part of the disadvantage of writing for a place like Salmagundi. But I was able to think more deeply about it, which is exactly the advantage of a place like Salmagundi, the role that it plays, and also the kind of writing I do. I'm not like a take guy. When people ask me to write a take about something that's happening in the news at the moment, I almost always decline. It's also weird because I wrote the piece during what I think of as the interregnum between the election and the inauguration, when we were still waiting to see, we were still holding our breath. So it doesn't, anyway, so it came out in April, but it doesn't reflect like the first 3 months. It's just about, which I think is good because it's important to remember where we were at and what was going on, then.
Doesn't this administration feel like dog years? Like one day, and this feels like, and it turned. I mean, the news cycle. It's just exhausting, right?
Yes. But by the same token, that's why I value people who can see beyond the churn of the day's news, because there are plenty of people whose writing on this stuff I value a great deal as well. So anyway, so enough preliminaries. You said, it's funny, you said the non-left. I actually call it the not left, and which is fine, non-left, not left. But also, I think the term has been misunderstood, but I think this is often the case. I think the misunderstanding may actually be better than what I meant. I'm not responding to your question, and I guess we're going to go in a different direction
if only Jesus Christ could have said that, right? I mean, that's to his followers, right? The misunderstanding is better than what I meant. Usually with Jesus, it's much, much worse.
Because what I mean by the not left is everything that is not the established, ideologically correct, progressive left. Everything, which I think in some ways forms one giant kind of entity, that everything else. But I think it's been understood. My sense is that you're understanding it in the way that Daniel did, which is people who used to identify with the left, as progressives, maybe as liberals, and who, without becoming conservatives or Trumpists or right wing, no longer can identify with that. And I would include myself in that. I mean, if people ask me, I'll say I'm progressive, but I'm progressive in the way that used to mean when it meant like the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign, where
when you said that, I completely identified with this. I voted for Bernie Sanders every time he was on the ballot. I've been involved in the anti-war movement. I've been, and this is, I find myself alienated.
Yes.
From existentially, right? It's not as though they say you can't come to meetings, you can't get, but there's an existential alienation I feel from the political landscape, from the space that I used to call home.
Many, many people feel this way. I actually wrote an earlier piece, and I can't remember what it's called, but I know it's linked on my website. And it came out in Unheard. But it was about that process that I went through, about being like just a garden variety NPR 5 hours a day listener, never questioned what the mainstream / liberal media was telling me about anything, until 2020, 2021. And I realized that it become completely ideologically captured, that it was shoveling a lot of identitarian bullshit at me. And it was quite a shock. And I think a lot of people have felt that. I think a lot of people have stopped listening to NPR. And fortunately, all of this happened at the same time as a lot of great podcasts were starting that were willing to tell the truth and to talk about things you're not supposed to talk about, to talk in ways you're not supposed to talk about, to debate, to entertain ideas. Again, some people went crazy and went to the right, but a lot of people just want to be able to think things through on their own merits. That to me is the definition of heterodox, which is sort of one version of what the not left used to be called. A heterodox person to me is just somebody who thinks every issue through on its own merits, and therefore whose opinions are not predictable based on their opinions about other things.
I look at someone like Bill Maher is occupying this space, right, at a pop culture level, where he has not really changed all that much. The culture has changed, right, and he's still a very left of center guy on policy prescriptions. And I imagine he and I if we sat down and talked public policy, would all have a whole lot of agreement on healthcare and entitlements and things. But because he'll talk with people, the fact that he will sit and talk with Jordan Peterson, that it's verboten. I mean, you just don't talk to those people, right? Or it's Levitical.
Yes.
I mean, you're unclean.
It's the fact that he's willing to criticize the left or liberals as well. I should say I don't find him to be a particularly incisive thinker, and I think he can be very stubborn and stuck in his own opinions. But yes, for many years, he was the only person. He was out there. I mean, he called his first show Politically Incorrect. He got canceled because he made a valid point about the 9/11 attack.
Right.
Which was simply that whatever those terrorists were, they were not cowards, which is what Bush was calling them. And for that, he lost his show. So yes, as somebody who speaks the truth courageously, I think he's a great exemplar, whatever I think of him as a thinker.
You bring up 9/11. It's very interesting because Nietzsche says somewhere that the sacred is what we all agree we're not allowed to laugh at. And that was one of the things that for a while that was sacred, right? Amongst in the civil religion, to the degree that we still had it. But it seems like the sacred canopy on the left has among this new progressive has just expanded exponentially, that you can't laugh at anything. I mean, you can't. This is why comedians like Jerry Seinfeld said, I just won't play college campuses anymore, right? I mean, this is death for a comedian, right?
Right, and the comedy that camp produces is actually not funny. I mean, paradigmatically, the Hannah Gadsby thing, where she did a set where she wasn't even trying to be funny, as I understand it. I haven't wasted my time watching it, but basically, it's like when you pass to the limit, you can't even be funny at all anymore. But I mean, we could talk about this more, but do you want to go back and talk about the life force?
I do. I want to talk about the life force. Let's get back to the life force, because I thought that was and you do say in this piece that I love this. You say you sound a little Nietzschean, and Nietzsche is my favorite philosopher. But I did think of Nietzsche when I listened to the conversation, like will to power, in the sense of, and this is not totalitarian stuff. This is just the drive to expand as a human being, right? And you think that the locus of that has left the current progressive scene?
Yes, I do, and I know that it sounds Nietzschean or vitalist, and I try to be careful to say that I'm not trying to make a vitalist argument, but only that this thing we're calling the life force is important. It's one important value among other important values. It's not the only one, but it's important, and I think the left has lost it. So sort of stepping back and maybe being a little sequential about the argument, I start by asking, why did Harris lose? In the midst of, and again, I wrote this, in the weeks after the election, there are all kinds of excuses being made. We don't need to rehearse them now. But I think that fundamentally she lost because she represents an exhausted establishment. I mean, exhausted of ideas, exhausted of creativity, exhausted of any new approaches, either tactical or strategic, or really policy approaches to the problems that face us. I mean, Biden was too obvious a symbol of that exhaustion. But even leaving that aside, I mean, we had Hillary Clinton foisted on us by the Democratic establishment. She was clearly, whatever her other virtues, and she has other virtues, she was clearly a terrible candidate. She was always going to be a terrible candidate. Then Biden was basically chosen for us 4 years later, and probably that was the right move, but he clearly offered nothing other than the fact that he was safe enough for people to vote for, when everyone else in that field was, running the woke Olympics, as Dan Savage called it. And then, the reductio ad absurdum was Kamala Harris. So this is sort of a big historical claim that I make, and it's in the spirit of conjecture. But I say, look, I had just seen the Bob Dylan movie, which came out over the holidays. And again, whatever else you want to say about that movie, I think it's an evocative picture of what was happening in the culture in the early 60s, which was the dawn of this tremendously energetic, exciting, creative culture that included youth culture, civil rights, and eventually women's rights, gay rights, and the anti-war movement, right? It was this tremendous explosion of newness into American life, including American political life. And I think that that like everything since then, the left, meaning really everything to the left of the center, so the liberals, left, progressive, has just kind of been a working out and a gradual waning of that energy. Like, we are still operating in so many ways, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, in the mindset, in the paradigm that got laid down in the early 60s, or let's say in the 60s and 70s, 60s and maybe early 70s. And that seems to me at this point to have just completely run its course and to be completely exhausted. That's what I'm saying is exhausted. That impulse that brought so many good things and shaped my life. I mean, I was born in '64. I think it became over-institutionalized. It became kind of habitual, rote. It became too much of an orthodoxy. And all of that really by the 90s, I would say. And at this point, it's just completely out of gas. It's completely out of gas. And as opposed to what we have on the right, which is completely monstrous in my opinion, but it is full of excitement, creativity, newness, energy, life force, and everything that comes with it, humor, risk, a willingness to debate, a fearlessness in the face of debate. Sometimes there's a kind of campy sensibility. Sometimes there's a kind of irony. All of these things are gone on the left, which has become this heavily patrolled, policed, kind of schoolmarmish, censorious environment that just kind of chokes off everything interesting, everything fun, everything that has
and
the
you know, as a
potential
Calvinist, I should take joy in this. I should take, as a Calvinist, I should say the left they're finally one of me. But you know,
yeah. Well, that's what it is. It's a kind of, I think it's a kind of neo-Calvinism, among other things.
Yeah, I mean, you list some people on the right, like, and I love you say the Silicon Valley, the trad wives.
Yeah.
Right. Why are the trad wives examples of the life force? Tell me what you see of the life force in that.
So I have a whole, like, it's a whole list in this one sentence of all the weird new.
It's a fantastic sentence.
You can read it if you like.
Yeah, I was looking for it right here. It's after the. Oh, here it is, right here. Yeah, I'll read it. I'll read you to you, Bill. There's the proliferation of philosophies and pseudo philosophies, and lifestyle formations and scenes. A Cambrian explosion of strange new species. Silicon Valley transhumanists, manosphere bros, post-liberal Catholic integralists, anti-corporate conservative policy wonks, health freedom libertarians, dime square scenesters, Mahamams, neo-pagans, alt-rightists, natalists, trad wives, trad caths, a new counterculture. Yes, much of this is loony or malevolent, though no more so in retrospect than utopian communism, but that is not the point. The point is that it is alive.
That's the point.
I love that. It's a great list. And what is it? The trad wives. I mean, tell me. And the trad.
So it's not that the trad wives per se are an example of the life force. It's that this whole explosion of creativity is an emanation of the life force. It's like people trying to do new and different things and put new and different things in the world. Again, most, if not all of which I don't like, but that is not the point. So, I mean, trad wives, I mean, I think people know. It's like, and so, I mean, some of this it's hard, it sort of exists at the level of the meme, and maybe people are actually also doing it. But I mean, trad wives is exactly what it sounds like. It's like women who declare that they are going to occupy the traditional role of the wife, the pre-feminist role of the wife, and they turn this into sort of an influencer thing or whatever the hell it is. It does seem to be a response to disappointments that some women have with the direction that feminism has gone or the world that feminism has created. Again, I'm not judging one way or the other. The point is, like in the 60s, people were experimenting with new lifestyles. I don't really see that on the left. I mean, there's this, there's certain still spinning out of like the, you know, polyamory and alternative families. I mean, maybe that's the one area where there's a little bit, but it still is kind of, like I said, spinning out. What I mean is it's still a playing out of the logic of the same directions that we've been going on the left since the 60s, right? It's, you know, it's, I mean, polyamory is just the latest chapter of the sexual revolution, and you know, the gender stuff is kind of the latest chapter of gay rights, women's rights, gay rights especially. These are like 60 years old. It doesn't mean people shouldn't do them. It just means there's nothing new here. It's the same old, even if it's a slightly different iteration of it.
Yeah, what is it about the LGBTQ plus? I feel like I left something out, but maybe I didn't.
A lot. You left a lot out.
Did I leave?
We're gonna have to have a struggle session after this.
This
2S, A.
2S, A. I knew I left out A. I don't want to show. I want a Maoist shame circle. That's what I need. I feel like I need that. That sounds like something I would have to pay a woman in Philadelphia $150 an hour to do. I don't have that kind of money. But I mean, what is it? What is it that in this identitarian nature of the LGBTQ plus SA that you don't find life forcey? Because there's a lot of self-expression, right? There's a lot of noise. I mean, you know, there's no. I was just at the Pride parade in Philly, or the Pride district, and there's energy there. I mean, what's not life force about it though?
Okay.
That's interesting.
I mean, and I don't want to fetishize that term life force so that we're like parsing whether something possesses a life force or not. But I mean, you're trying to remember that that initialism, that string of letters and numbers, in some ways is quite to the point, because first of all, you have to get it right. You're supposed to know what the latest thing is, and in some circles at least. I mean, maybe not every letter or number, but we also know that in those same circles, there's an entire vocabulary that you have to get right, and it's also changes. So the point almost is that you're always in a situation of deficit, right? You're always catching up to find the latest terminology so that you don't run afoul of the terminology police. So, you know, it used to be POC, then it became BIPOC, and if you said POC or, you know, right, you understand what I'm saying? Like, this is, of course, antithetical to any kind of freedom or ability to breathe when people are constantly policing you and you have to get the terminology exactly right. But I want to make a different point that I think is less frequently made, because we all know about the language policing and what that does to people, and their ability to think freely. It's exactly that. It's a string of letters. Let me explain what I mean. I had heard the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, like that exact term, diversity, equity, inclusion. I had heard that term, and I happened to be at a street festival, an art walk in Portland, Oregon, where I live, which is at the forefront of these things. And I ran into somebody I knew who works, she's an administrator at a local college. And for the first time, this is some years ago now, I heard the term DEI, not diversity, equity, inclusion. What came out of her mouth was DEI. And I realized when she said it, like, oh, that's diversity, equity, inclusion. But what I also realized was, oh, fuck, they've got an acronym for it now, which means that it's been taken up into the bureaucracy. This is the point. It's not lesbians and gay people and transsexuals. It's LGBTQAI2S+. It's it's BIPOC, right? It's this giant apparatus of bureaucratic control. There was a great piece just a few days ago in the Times by N.S. Lyons, or the real person whose pseudonym is N.S. Lyons, who's kind of a right-wing intellectual, but a smart person. And he harkens back to the book from the 50s, I think, The Managerial Revolution. And he says, like, the Managerial Revolution post-war book is about how control of society is passing over to professional managers who exist in corporations, they exist in government, they exist in nonprofits, universities, right? And it's a certain form of wielding power that's procedural, bureaucratic, institutional, and it just chokes everything off. So it's not diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's DEI, it's LGBTQ, it's BIPOC, it's, you know, we can think of lots of other examples. And this, if anything, is antithetical to the life force. It's that. It's this bureaucratization. Whereas, let me just, you know, what's happening on the right? All the structures have been blown apart by the life force, quite frankly, of this monstrous, you know, narcissist. But he's done it. He's like smashed the structures. And that's why all this stuff is growing up there in the ruins of it.
You know, it's interesting when you describe that. I thought of theological history, and I'm thinking of, it takes me back to seminary and learning about the sort of Calvin versus the Calvinists, right? In the Reformation of the 16th century, you have these guys breaking free. You have them, you know, Calvin's actually, I've read a lot of Calvin, which is, I don't know if this is a great thing to say.
He's
but,
a smart guy.
Yeah, you know, he was a smart guy.
I learned that from Marilyn Robinson, who writes, you know, writes about
yeah, no, Calvin was amazing. I've read the Institutes too many times, but he wasn't systematic. I mean, he was discovering the Bible, and he was armed with sort of humanistic hermeneutical lenses, and he was able to interpret the text and do things with the text and inspire. And there's a freedom there that the later Calvinist, scholastic Calvinism doesn't have, right? Then you've got to kind of, you get these long confessions, and you've got to believe people were predestined to, you know, and were they predestined before God chose to create the earth, or after? I mean, when exactly did God plan to damn these people to hell? It's very important. And this, you know, there's an ossification, right, of the movement, right? And what is life quickly becomes, there's almost a rigor mortis. And it's just interesting that I know maybe I'm the first person that puts the LGBTQII double plus S in conversation with the development of scholastic Calvinism, but there's a parallel there as you describe it.
No, it's not just it's not just those two. I think with that, at the risk of, I don't know, overgeneralizing, I think this is the nature of things. I think this is the nature. I started as a writer, as a dance critic, for reasons we don't need to talk about, in my 20s, and my favorite choreographer was Merce Cunningham, who was the great aesthetic revolutionary in dance. And at a time when we saw that those first generation or two of great modern dance choreographers die and leave, like Martha Graham, and leave behind companies that very quickly just became ossified, and the performance was no longer fresh, it was no longer live. The dancers were like doing the steps rather than dancing. Merce, whose whole art was about being in the moment, his whole art, I mean, he studied Zen Buddhism, his whole art was about being in the moment. He said, and it was, everybody understood this was the right thing to do, that when he died, the company would disband. There would be no effort to try to perpetuate this thing that lived in the moment through the creative force of this one unique individual. And I think this is the story over and over again in the arts, in religion. There are certain people, for whatever reason, former student of mine, Molly Worthen, just wrote a book called Charisma about...
Molly Worthen is coming on the show in a week or two.
Molly Worthen is awesome, and you can talk to her about this, but there are these individuals who, for some reason, possess this incredible spirit that inspires people, and they can be religious figures like Calvin or Jesus or the Baal Shem Tov, right, the founder of Hasidism. He actually wasn't even the founder of Hasidism. It was his disciples who founded it. He was just who he was. And then the structures build around these people. And you get the Hasidic movement or the Martha Graham Company or Christianity or Calvinism. And the spirit kind of dwindles. Now, I think sometimes there can be renewals if you have, you know, St. Francis, right, renewing the spirit of the thing. But fundamentally, I think this is the fate. This is the fate of movements. You know, Martin Luther King, and then what comes out. It's just the fate of movements, and that means that there needs to be, if, for example, you have a political project like you're a progressive, there needs to be ways of enabling that renewal to happen. I mean, Bernie, in some ways, was a renewal of the spirit of the left, but he got kneecapped by the woke, you know? I mean, as a progressive, there was no moment more promising to me in my adult life, really, than Bernie's 2016 campaign. And it just ended up, draining into the sands because the bureaucratic identitarian left, wouldn't have it.
Yeah, you talk about in the piece again, as you mentioned, the just utter exhaustion on the left, and how largely institutional liberalism is exhausted. Ezra Klein introduced me to this to a guy, Gary Gerstle, who wrote a book called The Rise and Fall of the Neoliberal Order, and he thinks that he chronicles political orders. And he says, a political order, these things last decades, not election cycles. And he said, it when your opponents adopt it. So Eisenhower doesn't come and say, all right, we're done with FDR liberalism. He expands the federal government, right? Or with neoliberal, with Clinton, you have, the era of big government is over, right? And so your opponents are Reaganites now, right? So, and you're fighting over these Reagan tax cuts, just how high, the 4%, we're going to, that's what the Democrats are. Oh, we can go 4% higher than the Reagan, than these top rates.
Right.
So, right. I mean, is the exhaustion, is it, first off, I mean, you have the takeover, the sort of eclipse of New Deal liberalism by Reaganite neoliberalism. And now that's eroding, right? I mean, Trump kind of comes in Trumpism and all the stuff you say, the trad this and the trad that and the transhumanists and all this stuff. They come in light of a Reaganism on the right that's dying, and there's something new. There's the new order yet. It doesn't seem to be established, right? And the biggest contester for that seems to be right-wing populism. And what my criticism to my friends, who I feel like this is why your stuff is a breath of fresh air, because I feel like I'm saying this all the time and no one's listening, is that when there's a new order dawning, you don't run around with Liz Cheney saying, hey, look, the old days weren't so bad, were they? This is, I was in Pennsylvania, I'm in Philadelphia, these events, these were the big events on the news. Oh, Kamala's running around with Liz Cheney. And it's not a Saturday Night Live sketch. That's the great thing. Right. It's an actual thing.
Yes. So let me say a couple of things. We've clearly entered a new order. The Democrats are going to have to figure out what that means for them, or they're going to become increasingly irrelevant and confused and pathetic. But, and I only realize this now as we're talking, it's hard for us to define what that new order is. That wasn't the case with FDR or Reagan. And I'm just old enough to remember Reagan, because FDR and Reagan both came into office with very clearly articulated understandings of what they wanted to do, both theoretically and practically. Because FDR came out of decades of progressive thought, and Reagan came out of decades of conservative thought. So everything was in place. Trump is a completely different phenomenon. We don't really know what he believes. We hardly know what he wants to do. He's a creature of impulse. He's a creature of destruction. He came to destroy the old order. But what he wants to replace it with is, it's not clear what he wants. And so now what we've seen really is various factions within his camp fighting it out for the future. Most obviously sort of Silicon Valley libertarians versus, sort of J.D. Vance type, sort of nationalists. And undoubtedly there are other factions in there, which says to me, first of all, it's much less clear what world we're in. We know that it's populist in some way, but we don't really know what this order looks like. But it also says to me, and maybe I'm just being Pollyannish here, that unlike the Republicans in the age of FDR, who were just completely in the wilderness, or liberals in the age of Reagan, who were completely in the wilderness and had no power to affect what was going to be happening for a while, maybe Democrats can seize this moment and define it, to take this energy that's arisen, that's populist, but it's other things as well, and try to shape the direction that it's going in, precisely because the Republicans don't really seem to have a very clear idea of the direction they want to go in. But in order to do that, obviously, liberals need to figure out we're in a different world now. The old world is not coming back.
Yeah, and don't you think that what's so interesting, what I find fascinating, is that Trump always finds a way. Always finds a way, as if this is again 20 years. It's been a few months of the same administration, but he does. There's these battles. He always finds a way to get Democrats defending the status quo, right? To just go back. So Doge, right? The brilliance of Doge is you put Democrats on, not saying, hey, we could get this isn't like a sort of Ezra Klein wonky, hey, we can do this better and be abundant and this and that. It's no, hey, these institutions aren't so bad. You get your Social Security checks, don't you? And you don't want that messed with, do you? And it's just so you look so inept when that's what you're defending. So it's amazing that you can lose to somebody that lose the rhetorical battle to somebody who clearly has some screws loose, but his combative instincts are so good.
It's that, and it's also, and I'm going to just be repeating things that people have been saying for a while, including David Brooks, who I think is a lot smarter and certainly a lot more sensible than many people give him credit for. And he recently wrote a piece saying exactly this, that Democrats need to, it's not about policies, you need to start over from the beginning. We need intellectuals now, not politicians. But he's also, and others have also talked for a while about how the Democrats don't have a story.
Yes.
And I would add, and this is in some sense the same thing, they don't have a central idea. They don't have a central idea. They have a million different policy plans, and they sort of come from a vague set of values and beliefs that Democrats haven't had to articulate to themselves for a long time. But there's no central idea. Harris didn't have a central idea. Hillary didn't have a central idea. You know, it was enough for Biden to be elected on the idea that Trump sucks, but that's not really an idea. that could only work once, right? So what's the idea?
It can only work once too. And COVID, I mean, look, no incumbent could have won during COVID.
Sure. But
no incumbent could have won, yeah.
You know, the point is, you know, we got one for free, basically. But we haven't had a central idea. And even Obama, I mean, it was really just charisma. He was, very appealing figure, obviously, but I mean, what was the idea? You know, yes, we can, hope and change. We are the ones we've been waiting for. None of that is an actual idea. They were inspiring slogans, but they're not ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously the intellectual deficit, as you're pointing out, as Brooks is pointing out, is huge. I wonder. You are a Jew from New York, raised in modern Orthodox, which is some of my best friends are modern Orthodox, actually. I'm interested. The Democratic Party and or at least the not left part of it that I think you and I inhabit is an exilic space, right? It's being in exile, and I wonder how your own Jewish identity allows you to see things through. Does it help you describe exilic reality? Because it's the tradition, right? I mean, that's what's more Jewish than exilic space.
That's a very interesting question and a very interesting conjecture. So I'm just going to be, I've never thought about it.
You heard it here first, folks.
Whether this is because I'm Jewish, I mean, I do think that it's at least partly because I'm Jewish. I think I am more comfortable recognizing that this is going to sound kind of banal, and maybe it's wrong, but I just feel like I'm more comfortable recognizing that things are bad. Like, I think I'm more comfortable surrendering illusions, because I think in some ways that's what exile is about. I mean, just like the story of, the 2,000 years of Jewish exile has been, getting to a new place, sort of feeling comfortable there in some ways. I mean, never very comfortable, but just like, okay, we can be here now. And then sooner or later finding out like, no, you can't. And you're driven out or you're massacred or whatever, and it's on to the next place. So I guess there's something in sort of the cultural DNA of being Jewish where you never hold on too tightly to any particular situation, any particular configuration. So the ability to say, and it wasn't easy for me to get here either, but the ability to say that world that I grew up with starting in 1964, took for granted, always thought would be there, is gone. And I don't know where we're headed. We put our packs on our backs. We're marching, we're trudging down the road again. I don't know where we're going, but I know that we've left the old place. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I heard former president of Princeton Seminary one time describe the difference between exiles and nomads. He said exiles, the people that exiles are always thinking about home, and he was talking about, like, in this context, he was giving a talk and he was talking about people that remembered 1950s and 60s America, which is the most Christian era in the history, right? Church attendance wasn't highest in the 1820s. It was the 1960s, right, where church attendance was highest in this country. And people have that in memory. He said, my daughter, she's a nomad. She's not looking towards home, right? That it lives a digital life. She doesn't, and it's very interesting. I think a certain generation looks at these two things on forms, address, permanent address, or as if there's some place that's home. Whereas, for some people, there's no permanent. I mean, the address is just where I'm sitting right now, right? I mean, there's no sense of home. I mean, I wonder, is there a difference between what you're saying, this exilic existence, where you're thinking about home, and nomadic existence, where, it almost sounds like you're describing nomadic existence, right? Where you never know where the next place is.
Okay, so this is a great distinction. This is a beautiful distinction. Of course, the Jews always had an idea of home in their head, and that was Zion. And so there always was,
which you can say Zionist on this podcast. It's not it's not one of the places where that's been scrubbed yet.
Right, and the word Zionist is the word that it is because Zion was the way that Jews named the Jewish homeland, the land of Israel or Palestine or whatever you want to call it. So there always was an idea of home. I think the idea that people are nomads now, I think, helps explain a lot of the kind of existential despair that young people especially, I think that's a great way of naming it. Because, well, I'm going to say two things on opposite sides of the question, but I'm kind of thinking this through. One of the things that I've been struck with by the left in recent decades, and one manifestation of the fact that I think its creativity is exhausted, is that the old left, the Marxist left, had a very clear idea of the world that it wanted to create. It wasn't necessarily a great world. There were Marxist socialists, there were also utopian socialists, right? So it wasn't necessarily the statist nightmare, but there was always this idea of what is the world that we want to create. And I feel like the left does not have that idea anymore. It does not know what it wants. At the same time, and this is jumping to the other side, I feel like there's still some kind of echo, some kind of emotional or psychic echo of the idea that the world is headed to a good place. And there's a phrase that's repeated ad nauseum on the left, and you know what it is, right? The moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. Yeah. I wrote a piece about this once. It was about the idea that history is on our side, or history will judge our enemies, because it's the same idea as the arc of the universe, because it embodies the idea that there is some future point where things will be better and we will be justified. So it's not a clear idea the way it was for Marxists or communitarian socialists, but it's this belief. This belief is completely naive and illusory.
You've just succeeded in doing something I didn't think possible, even after reading your piece. You made me feel worse about the left. Because there's nothing, what you just articulated there, there's nothing more depressing than the analysis that, well, you know what? There's no idea. They have no idea where they're going, no clear idea. But there's this confidence that it's all going to turn out better. That is, if you said, if we were describing like a friend post-divorce, and we said that this is how they're going through life, right? That they've got no idea what the hell is going on. They have no plan. But they've got this like rosy-eyed optimism that we would say this person needs institutionalized. This people needs a whole team. Like go to Vienna. They need a whole team of psychiatrists, not just once a week, $80 an hour stuff. What you just described is really bad.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I remember you reminded me of something I read in the journal N+1, the sort of millennial literary journal. Really, it was sort of this flagship of the new left journals, started about 15 years ago. Very, very smart people write for them. And I remember in the lead editorial a few issues ago, the guy said something to the effect of, socialism has to triumph, or socialism will triumph, because the alternative is just unthinkable. Like it has to, because, and it's like, that's the whole problem right there. It's like, seriously, you think because something is so bad, it can't happen? And the good thing must happen because what? Because there's some moral, I mean, unless you're Christian, which I doubt this guy was. And even Christianity locates the utopia in the, after the world or outside the world.
Yeah.
Like, do you think there's some kind of mysterious force in the world that just ensures that good things are going, that things will work out, that we will get to a better place? I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's a Philadelphia-based kind of Christian therapist named Paul Tripp, and he wrote a book that I read. He's a pretty conservative guy, but somebody gave me one of his books, and there was a line of it I'll never forget. He said, when I'm working with a client, he said, people in crisis, they usually don't need information. They need imagination. And that to me has stuck with me. It's decades ago I read this, but that strikes me as fundamentally correct, right? Most people just don't need more data. They need the capacity to see their world different. If you're really in crisis, if you're addicted, or if you're in some sort of self-defeating behavior, and you don't need more data, right? This is self-defeating. This is no good. You need to be able to see yourself, your world, your relationships, your possibilities really differently, right? And that to me is what, when I read your piece in Salmagundi, which is all of our listeners should subscribe to now, which I think is fantastic. This piece you wrote post-election, for good or ill, right? The imagination's on the right. The transhuman this.
Exactly right.
These people are mad. They might be nuts, some of them.
That's right.
But they're imaginative. And on the left, I don't hear. I sent someone your piece, and they said to me, this guy runs a discussion group on social audio of anti-Trumpers. And he says, well, this piece sounds a little whiny. I'm tired of hearing that Kamala was a bad candidate. She was great. She was great at the convention. And then he goes, but she didn't take it to Trump enough. And she didn't do this. And she didn't separate herself from Biden. And I just read back, but if she didn't do those things, aren't you not a good candidate? Like, wouldn't a good candidate? It's like saying, this guy's a great ball player. He just swings at all the bad pitches. Well, then maybe he's not a great ball player. But it's the imagination piece, right? It's that you can't say the failure of imagination. I just can't say I can't say it. I have to go with these scripts, right? And this is like what keeps people in these self-defeating loops, right? Because I can't get off the damn script.
Yeah. So first of all, yes, a lot of this stuff on the right looks nuts. And also, I just don't like it. But I mean, I think that's almost the definition of imagination, is that the imaginative object looks nuts. I mean, again, I think about Merce Cunningham's dance, which people would look at and be like, what is this? This doesn't mean anything. Or Cubism, right? This isn't art. This is garbage. Or my 5-year-old could do, right? I mean, or certain political ideas. Zionism, for example. I mean, when Herzl first proposed, like, we're going to go back and create a Jewish state in Palestine, people thought he was nuts. And one of the reasons Zionism at first was a very small movement was simply because people thought this could never happen. This is crazy. So if we don't have room for crazy, for entertaining ideas that seem nuts, then we don't have imagination. And the other thing, and your friend is one example, and this is unfortunately why I really don't have a lot of hope for the left, even though it kills me to say that, because I really do think terrible things are happening now, and we need a Democratic Party that can dig us out of this. But it's precisely because it's become so heavily bureaucratized, institutionalized, patrolled, policed. So many people are making a living perpetuating the status quo on the left, whether it's Democratic Party operatives who keep giving us these candidates, or academic leftists in their tenured positions, or people who write for the New York Times. How do we dislodge this immovable mass of time servers, of job holders? That's what we need to get out of the way.
Do you have hope for, I mean, you think about the Reformation, right? I mean, it couldn't have happened. I mean, Gutenberg was a pious Catholic, right? And if he would have known, I mean, it would have been horrifying to him, thinking, I'm making the instrument that's going to massively undermine the church I love, right? But it was, I mean, John Huss, a century, before, is a Czech guy who, had a lot of Luther's ideas and didn't have German princes and didn't have a printing press, right? but is the proliferation of podcasts, Substack? I mean, Substack is so interesting, right? I mean, you're on Substack. I mean, people are out there. Is this? I mean, do you have any hope for the proliferation, the democratizing of things, the flattening of things, with this sort of possibility that anybody with a laptop now can create content, or is it too hard to break through?
No, you know what? You're absolutely right. You've pulled me back from the brink of despair, and it's interesting.
Well, Bill, I'm glad it did, because you've put me further in. Okay.
It's interesting because I mean we've had social media for a while now, but and in some ways it's played very, very important political role. I mean, Twitter before Elon was part of what helped sink the left. Substacks. But I do think Substacks and podcasts are promising, and I'm thinking out loud now. It's partly because they're different than other social media models, right? It's not 140 or 280 characters and all the shit that creates, all the dynamics, all the emotions, all the not thinking. Now we have at least two robust media where people have deeper conversations or write deeper things. And certainly as a reader, as well as a writer, it's very exciting for me. We started by talking about Daniel Oppenheimer, Eminent Americans. Will it start to make a difference in the established left? We kind of see the lines shifting. We see places like the New York Times or the New Yorker reluctantly starting to pay attention to Substack. They can no longer ignore it. They can no longer dismiss it. Are we going to start to see voices that emerged in the Substack or podcast space show up on Ezra Klein or Chris Hayes? I hope so. I don't think they can ignore it forever, and I absolutely think that this could be the source of renewal.
Well, I wanna read something to you. So Francis Fukuyama recently came out with published on I think this was on Perspectives or something, or Persuasion. No, Persuasion.
Yeah, I write for Persuasion.
Yeah. So Fukuyama, you must probably saw this. That he posted some stuff about excerpts from a lecture from Leo Strauss, right? And it was stuff where Leo Strauss was sort of talking about the reaction to Weimar and what was going on, and basically Fukuyama is saying, I see this basically on the right today, and this sort of same sort of immoral. I mean, he's sort of saying that this is the problem. We need a response to this kind of stuff. And Rusty Reno over at First Things, who's a friend of mine, and our politics aren't on the same page, but I like Rusty a lot. he wrote a piece where he basically says that Fukuyama really doesn't get Strauss, and Rusty wrote in his short response to Fukuyama. He says, as Strauss reports, teachers in Germany were in one way or another modern themselves. They discoursed about historical context and taught technical subjects. In a word, education was anti-metaphysical, which is to say progressive, as Strauss calls it. Rather than taking the moral protest seriously, professors were satisfied to point out the juvenile nature of its destructive impulse, or the incoherence of various post-liberal proposals of the time, as does Fukuyama, who, like so many others today, often says that the great grave error of those who criticize liberalism rests in the fact that they are not liberal. These purported refutations amounted, as Strauss puts it, to repetitions of the things which the young people knew already by heart. The same is true today. Therein lies the disaster. The nihilistic students rather needed old-fashioned teachers. They needed to feel the demands of those who spoke with an authority born of devotion to a tradition of truth that has deep roots. The antidote to nihilism is not an enumeration of warnings about intolerance and authoritarianism. It's to be found in metaphysical weight, as it were, the power to compel minds and inspire love's mania, the desire to serve the beloved, even to sacrifice oneself. Is that what we need on the left, Bill? Do we need metaphysical weights? Because I see none on the new left.
Well, here I may tack in a direction that you don't expect. First of all, that was all beautiful. I hadn't read those pieces, and I think they're really well said. Unfortunately, I think that wokeness in many ways answers those needs. And I think that's one of the reasons it's become so powerful.
It's a bad metaphysic.
It's a terrible metaphysic, but it's a metaphysic. And it's obviously powerfully motivating to a lot of people. I think it's sort of the center left, the liberal left, the more, quite frankly, I think, intelligent and deeply informed left that, lacks all conviction, as Yeats would say, that's sort of over-intellectualized, overly inclined to make rational arguments against emotional impulses, right? That are it's a non sequitur. I hope that wokeness, never mind peak wokeness, I hope it's sort of becoming in turn exhausted. And I think the youngest of the young adults are tired of it precisely because it's, even, for all of its problems, and it's just oppressive and it feels icky. But yes, so what, I think that one of the reasons that so many Americans, white Americans, even conservative Americans, love Martin Luther King, it's not just that he's less threatening and he was nonviolent. He is like the last American to be able to speak in religious terms that have authority for people on the left. And we love that because everybody loves it. I mean, I actually just heard Cornel West in person, and I disagree with his politics a lot, but he is also an extremely compelling preacher. And we need preachers, but how do you have a preacher if you're not religious?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can. I mean, people have preached sort of what I believe, secular humanism, but I don't see that, right? I don't see anyone making that compelling case.
There's no myths. I talked to my secular humanist friends and atheist friends about this all the time. It's like the problem is people don't worship ideas. They need symbols, they need myths, they need dramas, they need these things are, and I'm not saying that the left, I'm not saying that the secular humanist atheists couldn't create them. They're just not yet. I mean, there's nothing people aren't going to worship cool, naked abstractions, right? They need something more substantive than that.
Well, I do think once upon a time secular humanism had a beating heart. And I think that I understand what you're saying. I mean, it can't have like myths, but I mean, a lot of it was invested, for example, in the idea of civic religion or civic commitment, right? To an idea of America, right? But I certainly think that's desperately needed on the left, is to recover some idea of America, some love of America, some story about America, right? It's not going to be the old story or maybe even the
Yeah, yeah.
newer
But the
story.
story that is on the left is, yeah, America's going to die from climate change, and we deserve it because of systemic racism.
Exactly, exactly.
That's
not a good idea. It's not a good story.
Yeah, yeah. Now let's go march at Washington.
Right. As opposed to, again, I mean, I hate to, evoke King, but I mean, King famously called America back to its principles. He didn't hate America in the same way. He thought it was redeemable.
And it was calling America that, I mean, it was King had civil religion, right? He could quote from the Hebrew Bible. He could quote Lincoln and the founding fathers. Like, he had a civil religious sacred text he could preach from like a preacher. Again, the Hebrew Bible was there, but there were secular sources too. And it made a religious tapestry. I want to ask you about one other thing is before we wrap up our time together. I heard another conversation, and I think in the one you had with Daniel, you talk about, you had a lot of friends you grew up with who went to Israel, who moved to Israel, who invested in Israel, who did a lot to help make Israeli society what it is. And you chose not to do that as a modern Orthodox kid. You chose not to. First off, you chose not to become a doctor, which, I mean, what a sin. And you chose not to go to Israel. And you say that, with Bibi, it kind of, you sort of, that changed your relationship to Israel a little bit, the politics. But after October 7th, you remarked that changed a little bit. I mean, where are you at? I mean, now we just had Israel attacking Iran. I mean, Israel is on the center of the world stage. Once again, how are you feeling about your own relationship to Israel as an American Jew of the left right now, or of the not left?
So first of all, I'm writing a book about my Jewishness, and I'm dealing with all of this stuff. Modern Orthodox childhood, which I left when I suddenly lost my faith in 10th grade in yeshiva high school. Then
you lost your faith. Do you tell people in the 10th grade? Or are you like, hey, I just don't believe anymore? How do you come out there? I mean, talk about LGBTQIA.
I was thrown out.
So you outed yourself. You said
I didn't, but people figured it out.
How do they figure that? Okay, you got to tell. How do they figure that? You're at lunch and whatever you say, I think I'm going to go eat pork chops. I mean, how do they know?
I don't know that I remember the specifics, or at least I can't recall them at the moment, but it's like, I think, I didn't say I don't believe in God anymore, but I think I started to ask questions or just make asides, make little sarcastic comments. This was I think probably, early spring of my sophomore year. And I was eventually, I was allowed to finish the year, so I wasn't officially expelled. But this is why it was felt that I needed to be extirpated from the situation, because misbehavior is one thing, but yeah. So
a little leaven in a little yeast, it's gonna all the bread, all the dough, it's gonna get in all the dough.
No, this was Passover. We didn't want leaven. I was already transitioning to the next part of my Jewish life, which was progressive Zionist youth movement. So when you say friends of mine went and helped create the Israel as it exists today, I need to clarify. Those friends over there are deeply, deeply distressed by the direction that Israel's taken for many years now. But I have friends who went and founded the environmental movement in Israel, who are at the forefront of Jewish religious pluralism in Israel, which is a struggle because of the Orthodox rabbinate, to accept non-Orthodox Jews and non-Orthodox marriage ceremonies and all that, female rabbis. I have a friend who's a woman rabbi in Israel. And the movement for coexistence with between Israelis and Palestinians, just and peaceful coexistence. If anybody knows the name Gershon Baskin, he is the guy who negotiated the release of Gilad Shalit for the 1,000+ Palestinian prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, many years ago. He's a he was a young Judean. He went to camp with my big sister, to our summer camp. Okay, so I chose not to go to Israel. So I spent the year after college in Israel. And I really thought about it a lot. I mean, I thought that's where I was headed. And I don't know that I made the decision in the most serious way possible. I think fundamentally at that point in my life, I wasn't ready to make serious life decisions. I also think that in some ways, the movement, for all that was great about it, gave us a kind of idealized picture of Israel. And it was all, we're going to be kibbutznikim and, start a new settlement. And people did that. But I think the reality of, modern Israeli society circa 1985, when I got there, and Tel Aviv and so forth, just didn't, it's like, I didn't find what I had been taught to look for there, and I wasn't mature enough to kind of reimagine what it could be. And I kind of just went back to an American life, and a life that didn't really have any Jewish affiliation, an intense, abiding, ineradicable sense of being Jewish, but no affiliation, no outward embodiment. And meanwhile, especially starting around the turn of the century, Israeli politics started to go farther and farther to the right. I think Netanyahu is a deeply malevolent individual, and I think the whole settler policy has been a horrible mistake, and as well as a horrible crime, what's come out of it. So I kind of turned my back in a lot of ways. And then October 7th happened. And it was a turning point for me emotionally, to the extent that my emotions matter to anybody but myself. But I think a lot of Jews feel this way. And what it taught me was that I couldn't really turn my back. I could deplore Israeli policy, but this was still part of me. I was still part of it. In previous cycles of Hamas-Israel violence, I would think, oh, it's happening to them. And then October 7th happened, and I felt like it was happening to me, to us, and that the wheels of Jewish history were turning again. And this book that I'm writing, which is a memoir, is also going to be situated historically. And the biggest historical framework, it's part, sort of the medium-sized framework is post-war American Judaism that I was born into. But the larger one is the Jewish entry into modernity, which dates from the French Revolution. Jews are allowed, and in many ways forced, to leave the ghetto and participate in European society, in Western society. Some embrace it, some fear it, and a whole panoply of responses emerges to try to deal with modernity as a Jew, to either be Jewish and modern at the same time, or to refuse to be modern, which is what the ultra-Orthodox do. I grew up modern Orthodox. It is literally an attempt to synthesize being a modern person and being an Orthodox person. It's a very unstable compound, and it turns out to have its own history. But of course, one of the biggest aspects of modern Jewish history turned out to be that Jews finally found this place called America, where they could be citizens in a way they'd never been able to be before, even in post-emancipation Europe. Even in 19th century France, we were never really accepted. But now, this has been thrown open again. I mean, I'm not saying that we're going to be driven out, but I think Jewish life is now in question in America in a way that it hadn't been. And my father, who had literally been a Holocaust refugee, he and his parents got out of Czechoslovakia with 3 days to spare in 1939. And many people in his family died, and in my mother's family. He would always say what every Jewish parent said back then, which is, it can happen here. Things about the Gentiles and whether they're really our friends. And I dismissed them because I was American and everything looked great, and this is just an old world way of thinking. And I've had to reevaluate, and I know many, many Jews feel the same way.
But is it, I imagine from the location in which you're coming from, you're kind of looking and you're prepared for the anti-Semitism on the right, right? And that's always been. It's still here. It's always been there in our culture, current cultural memory, anyway. Is it weird when it comes from the left? We could just say, like, that's the one identity that's not sacred, right? It's the one you can say things on the left about Jews, you can't say about any other group, right? You can say things about Israel, you couldn't say about any other group, right? I mean, it's as someone who's on the left and has been in left institutions, the left might don't. I mean, it's remarkable to me the anti-Semitism on the left right now. I mean, how is it adjusting to that?
Well, when I was in Zionist Youth Movement in 12th grade, I remember I was in Manhattan somewhere, and there was some kind of socialist workers something handing out literature, and I thought, oh, great! I'm a socialist Zionist. I'm going to go and talk to them. And when she found out that I was a Zionist, she said, I'm not going to talk to you. And I said, well, we can't even talk. She said, I wouldn't talk to the KKK.
Wow.
Okay. So there's a very old strain of anti-Zionism on the left, and anti-Semitism, quite frankly. I mean, Marx, despite being Jewish, he wrote this famous essay when he was a young man called On the Jewish Question, which is intensely anti-Semitic. It's basically the kind of anti-Semitism that says that Jews are the bankers that control the world and their God is money. He literally says their God is money. At the same time, so I knew that that was the case on the far left. But you're right. I was completely shocked by the eruption of anti-Semitism. There's legitimate anti-Zionism, but a lot of it is so clearly, blurs into anti-Semitism, or it's just outright anti-Semitism.
I mean, it's a sneaky narrative, right? Because the I mean, you can smuggle the anti-Semitism in.
Yes.
In a way that's yes. Subtle and adroit, yes. And
And at the same time, there's legitimate, not only, listen, I criticize Israeli policy. I think it's horrible. I don't criticize the right of the state of Israel to exist, but it's a legitimate argument, at least. This is why it's complicated. So you can be legitimately anti-Zionist, but there's so much anti-Semitism there. It's so clear. And the conflation of Jews with Zionists and physical, I mean, we all know at this point. But the depth of it, the intensity of it, the extent of it is it's nauseating and it's kind of terrifying.
Bill, what gives you hope these days? So you're in your 60s.
I think we stipulated that I don't have much hope.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. I mean, are there other things that bright spots out there that in art and in activism, anything that gives you some solace or gives you some hope that, hey, maybe there's a candle that's being lit, rather than cursing the darkness?
I mean, we talked about Substack and podcasting. It seems like a small thing, but I do think that things have cracked open, as we've been saying all along. The way I've always answered this question in recent years, and I'm wondering if I still feel sort of emotionally capable of doing it, is I'm old enough to have lived through a whole succession of events. The fall of the Soviet Union, 9/11, the financial collapse, the election of Donald Trump, and others that we can name, October 7th, that nobody saw coming, often even until the moment they happened, that changed the course of history. Some of them were good, like the fall of communism, and some of them were bad. But the point is, history is completely unpredictable. And while that's not hope, what it means is I have a sense of openness. It's harder to sustain now because of how things are going. But to the extent that I have hope, it's that. It's like, no, we don't know what's coming, which means that good things can be coming too.
Well, Bill, of course, and one of those good things is going to be your new book coming out, which I look forward to when you're finished with it. And Bill, I really appreciate your work. Thanks for spending some time on the podcast talking with me about it.
I enjoyed this. I learned things, which is the best thing you could say. about a conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.